What is up, guys? It's Ethan Ryder with Soccer for Us Kids. That's U.S Kids. I'm still here with the special edition Alaska version, if you want to call it that. I'll be in Alaska all summer, so I won't be getting back to my hometown of Decatur, Georgia until early August, where then I'll start recording videos from there. For now, though, I'm in Alaska, and this is explainer video number 5, and let's get started. This video is going to talk about Champions League, Europa League, CONCACAF Champions League, and talk about all the different ways of getting into those and how they all coexist. The first thing we're going to talk about is how FIFA is divided into different areas. FIFA stands for FIFA International de Football Association. This is a big president of soccer. Everything comes from FIFA, and FIFA divides the world into multiple different areas. The two that we're going to talk about mainly today is the CONCACAF and the UEFA. The UEFA is the European, where the Champions League takes place, and the CONCACAF is the North America. So I got that wrong in the last video. CONCACAF does not count South America. South America is its own different section, which FIFA calls CONMEBOL. The CONCACAF is just of the North America section, so it doesn't count the South American, Brazilian, and Argentinian teams. So let's talk about it. Since FIFA is divided into all these different places have their own Champions League sort of thing, which they all come together and coexist in the end to compete for Club World Cup. We'll talk about that later on in the video. Let's first talk about Champions League from the UEFA section. The UEFA Champions League is what it's called sometimes. The UEFA Champions League we're going to talk about from the Premier League standpoint. So from the Premier League standpoint, if you make top 4, you are guaranteed to be in the Champions League. This changed just last year. The 4th place team had to have a play-in, and they had to do qualifiers to play in to become the group stage. That was actually Liverpool last year, and they played Hoffenheim, which is a team from Germany, and they had to qualify. And since they beat Hoffenheim, then they were in the group stage of the Champions League. However, now that rule has changed, and the 4th place team is automatically in the group stage of the Champions League. Another way to get into Champions League if you're a Premier League side is to win the Champions League. If you win the Champions League the year before, you are guaranteed a place in the Champions League group stage for the next year. That is one way to win. That is the second way. The first way is to make top 4. The second way is to win Champions League. Now, the third way is to win Europa League. If you win Europa League, then you are guaranteed a Champions League group stage place in next year's tournament, Champions League. That's kind of interesting. It's a little confusing. If you win Champions League, it seems obvious that you'd be in Champions League next season. But if you win Europa League, which is the one below the Champions League, then you are guaranteed qualification into the Champions League for next year. Now we're going to move on to the Europa League and how you can qualify for the Europa League. One way that you can do this is if you win the FA Cup, which is the tournament I was talking about in the explainer video before. If you were an England team and you win the FA Cup, you are guaranteed Europa League group stage for next year's Europa League competition. Another way that you can get into it is if you win the League Cup, which has been called the Capital One Cup, and it is now called the Carabao Cup. If you win that competition, then you are guaranteed the 3rd qualifying spot for Europa League, which means you have to qualify to get into the Europa League, which is a very good reason because a lot of teams that are in the lower tier sometimes win the League Cup, and some of those teams aren't quite ready for the Europa League, so they have to qualify through. If they are ready, they'll qualify through and they'll become part of the Europa League. A lot of times, this spot is not actually used because someone that has already made it wins the League Cup, like an elite team wins the League Cup, so it doesn't actually matter. We'll talk about that in just a few seconds. Another way to get into the Europa League is 5th place. Now, if you land in a top 4, you get Champions League, you're guaranteed Champions League group stage. If you get 5th place in the Premier League, you are guaranteed Europa League group stage. So the 3 ways to get into Europa League that I've talked about is if you win the FA Cup, you're guaranteed group stage. If you win the League Cup, you are guaranteed a 3rd spot play-in. And if you get 5th place in the Premier League, you are guaranteed Europa League group spot. However, there are a lot of complications that make this very complicated and very confusing, but I'm here to try and explain it. If someone wins the FA Cup, but they get into the Champions League group stage via their league position, then their group stage place for Europa League goes to the next highest finisher in the Premier League. So what this means is if a team wins the FA Cup, like let's say Liverpool last year won the FA Cup, however they finished 4th place, so the Europa League group stage part that they are given is not going to be able to be used, then the team that's high, the next highest team, the 5th place team, gets Europa League. So normally it's the 6th place team is guaranteed Europa League. Also, whoever wins the League Cup, if they get into Europe, like I was saying, one of the elite teams in the Premier League get into Europe via their league position, then the qualify that they get is also given to the next highest finisher. However, if a team wins Europa League and gets into the Europa League, if a team wins Europa League and they get one of the Europa League or the Champions League qualifying spots, then if they win Europa League and they get the qualifying spot by getting 5th place in the Premier League, their Europa League qualifying pass is not given to the next highest team. Let me rephrase that. So, if a team wins the Europa League, they are guaranteed Champions League qualification. However, if they win the Europa League group stage qualification by getting 5th place in the Premier League, that's not passed down. They are just in the Champions League, and instead of having the normal 4 teams in the Champions League and 2 teams in the Europa League, there's 5 teams in the Champions League and 2 teams in the Europa League. So, once you are in these different competitions, if you lose in the Champions League in the group stage, you are actually put down to the Europa League, and then you can compete in that competition. However, if you get past the group stage, or if you lose in the Europa League, you are out. So let's say you get past the group stage in Champions League and go to the next part of that competition, which is the last 16. If you lose there, you're out of the competition and you don't continue to play. But if you lose before and in the group stage and you don't make it out of the group stage, then you go to Europa League. If you lose ever in Europa League, you're out. So let's talk about the CONCACAF Champions League now. The CONCACAF Champions League is made, you can make it, I'm talking the MLS standard. You can make it if you win the MLS. You can go to the next year's CONCACAF Champions League. If you get the Supporters' Shield, which is the most points accumulated in the MLS that season, you can go to the CONCACAF Champions League. And if you are the second highest for the Supporters' Shield, you go to the CONCACAF Champions League. However, that's a little confusing. It's the second highest in the opposite conference. So if Atlanta United in the Eastern Conference wins the Supporters' Shield, a team in the Western Conference like Sporting Kansas City has to win that next spot for the CONCACAF Champions League. It's not the second team in Supporters' Shield. It's the highest team in the Supporters' Shield race that's in the opposite conference. The fourth way that you can do it is winning the Lamar Hunt U.S. Open Cup, which is kind of like the League Cup in England. However, in America, it's one cup. And if you win that cup, you are guaranteed group stage in the CONCACAF Champions League. So all of these come together. I talked about the CONCACAF Champions League, and I also talked about the UEFA Champions League. However, there are plenty of different Champions Leagues that happen in the CONMEBOL area. There's CAF, which is the African area, AFC, which is the Asian area of the world, and all of these teams play, and they all have their own Champions League. All of these teams, when they win, the winners go on to the Club World Cup, which is about 8 teams that end up playing each other. And these teams play together to try and win yet another trophy, which is called the Club World Cup. Most of the time, the UEFA Champions League team wins it. However, sometimes and every now and then, a team that's not from Europe wins this trophy. So this is another thing that you can fight and participate in if you win the Champions League. Thank you for watching. This is the 5th explainer video for Soccer for Us Kids. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I made you less confused about the different competitions in the Champions League. If you have any more questions, remember, comment below your questions, and I'll try and make it more clear and answer any of your questions that you have. And remember, click that subscribe button, hit the like. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching.